All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Comic Pros. My name's Steve. Also with me is going to be my buddy Norm.
Howdy.
And first of all, want to say I am extremely apologetic about last week's stream. My audio was all over the place. It wasn't until the very end of it that I actually got figured out what was kind of going on. But this time, we're good. So, how's everything going with you today, Norm?
Good. Looking forward to our third episode, and
It's our
we've
fourth.
got some stuff we're going to hit on, which I'm sure you'll go over with the
Yep.
both.
All right. Well, first we got that we're going to be going over the different ages of comics, the comic supplies, how to buy certain books, what to look for when you are buying those books. Because there's a book that's out this week that if you're going to be buying them online, make sure that you're buying the actual right book, and we'll show you the difference. And then we got the comic market by the age and the top genre percentage. So without further ado, let's get into the first topic, which is going to be the different age or different comic ages. Norm?
Alrighty. Yeah, there's five essential ages,
Yep.
and most folks that have been around in comics know this. But and for the data that we crunch in here, which is just a small amount, but what we do crunch, platinum and golden is considered just one of the ages, but those are actually two separate ages. But as far as calculation wise, they were considered as one age, and that's basically pre-World War II all the way through to the 50s. Silver Age is 1950s to 1970. The Bronze Age is 1970 to 1984, and then the Modern Age, which we included the Copper Age in, goes all the way from 1984 to current. And if we were to fit the Copper Age in there, it would be 1984 to the creation of Image Comics in the 90s. And then from then on, that would be Modern Age. So those are the five ages that we're going to review tonight, and that you just need to be aware of. Each of them is designated by a change or a significant adjustment to the comics and the comic market as a whole. For instance, the last item that I alluded to, which was the creation of Image Comics. It's a huge independent comic company outside of DC or Marvel, and that was a huge event with major key creators instituting the creation of Image Comics. So it's just one example of the different ages that we can that we're going to review.
Cool. So then what I'm going to go over is basically kind of your overall comic book supplies and stuff like that. Because when you're first getting into comics, a lot of shops, they'll have their little bags and boards that they'll offer for 25 cents, a nickel, depending on where you're going from. If you're buying older books, a lot of times they will include a lot of those actual bags and boards with the book, especially if you're buying an older issue. So very rarely will you ever find books being sold outside of a comic book bag and board, which is a good thing, because for the most part you want to protect these investments. You want to make sure that everything is good to go. Now, what's happening right now in the industry is everything is on super back order. So finding bags right now is going to be harder than anything. Finding your boards is going to be even harder, because there's just not a lot of supply right now. And that being said, the cost of plastics has just gone up. So what's going to end up happening is normally those, over here in California, we pay about $5.99 for your 100 packs of regular comic book bags. But now what's going to happen is these bags and boards price is actually going to go up significantly, probably almost double the amount. So
So they become more expensive, and how do you know that, Steve? I think we had talked earlier in the week about that.
Um,
How did you come across that?
so basically, the distributors, because I've reached out to BCW and Ultra Pro, and
And
those are,
you reached out to them because you currently work in a retail
yeah,
establishment a couple of times a week,
yep,
and so you reached out to them on behalf of that establishment. Is that correct?
that is correct. And so what's happening right now is they can't make the stuff fast enough. Everybody's getting into the industry, which is great. More collectors, the better off it is. But the problem is that this all of a sudden influx of all these different collectors, they're not really ready for um, the supplies. They were never really there. So now they're trying to backtrack, and so most stuff is pretty much sold out until beginning of next year. So, but that being said, there's your typical your poly bags, which is normally what you find at your local comic book shops. Occasionally, you will actually find that they'll offer Mylars. Mylars are extremely well made product. There are pros and cons to Mylars, and the pros is they do not yellow, or at least the ones that I've used. I've had them on a lot of my books for going on 20 years, and I haven't seen any yellowing or anything of that nature.
Which brand do you use, Steve?
I use what they're called eGerber. eGerber, they make boards and they make Mylars. Now there's three types of Mylars that they sell. They sell Mylites, which are about as thin as your typical poly bag that most of your comic book shops use. So they're really really thin. Since they're thin, they are very easy to split them open. But with the Mylar 2s, they're a little bit thicker. Mylar 4s, I would try to stay away from those as much as you're probably wanting to completely protect your comic. The Mylar 4s are extremely hard to use, and when you do use them, a lot of times people want to take that board and they want to push it inside with that comic, and a lot of times they'll actually ruin the comic more than they would actually protect it. So the other thing with Mylars, which is extremely scary, is if you don't line them up perfectly, you will actually slice your cover right off, because they are super sharp, but they're super durable once you get the comic book inside. But that being said, those are kind of the pros and cons to Mylars. But your regular poly bags, they're really good products. But what will happen, since it's a really thin piece of plastic?
What company do you use for your standard bags?
So what I use for my standard bags, I actually use BCW stuff, Ultra Pro stuff.
They're not. We don't have any kind of agreement with them.
No, we're not sponsored by BCW. I've just been collecting for a really long time. I've gone through both types of products, and it's a product that I absolutely love. I will gladly spend that double the price just for these products.
How long have you been buying comics?
I've been buying comics for 30 years.
And have you been collecting them that whole time as well?
Yep, 100%. And
you're a 30-year veteran collector,
right?
And you like BCWs?
Yes, I do.
BCW, you can write the check and send it over.
Or I take a free product as well.
Yeah, really. Oh, free product. Like that.
But like with Ultra Pros, they do make a solid product. They're just not quite as thick as I would like them to be. And it seems that when I did use Ultra Pros, they did yellow a lot quicker. So that's something you have to kind of be in mind about. Is that
well, you touched on a key point there. They yellowed a little bit quicker. So getting off of the brand names now, but just talking about normal bags from back in the day, regardless of what they are. if I'm a collector of modern and copper and a little bit of late bronze from the late 70s, early 80s, mid to early 90s,
Yep.
and I've been sitting on my bags and boards and they've all been stacked away nicely, neatly in their boxes. Should I replace my bags and my boards now that it's 20, 30 years later?
100%. I cannot stress that enough. If you're not replacing your bags, so a standard practice that I do with my comics, if I'm gonna poly bag my comics, the one thing that I always do is I'll actually put a date on top of my actual box of the day that I went and I rebagged and boarded everything. The reason why you want to do that is because typically poly bags, they only last about 7 years. Um, so Mylars, they are a lot more expensive, but you don't have to replace them. But if you don't have the money, poly bags will suffice. You just have to make sure that you keep on track and at least replace them out about every 7 years. And 7 years is being extremely gracious. Um, I would at least try to double check on them at least, every 4 or 5 years. So, yep.
Sounds like good practice.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you can do a bunch of different little things, and we'll kind of touch on those on a later episode. But for the most part, getting the actual product right now is going to be extremely kind of hard, and that's something that I want everybody to be aware of, especially if you go into your comic book shop and you say, hey, look, I'm looking for some bags and boards. 90% of the stores around here in California have nothing for sale. Nothing for sale. Because the reason why that is because they are buying collections. They are having to rebag and board all those books to make sure that they present a nice, decent product to everybody. But
They need them for their stock, basically.
they need it for their stock, and so they're not wanting to give up a lot of that stuff. So if you're able to find them, buy them. Don't be as greedy, because there are a lot more people getting into this hobby, and so yeah, that's everything about kind of your typical comic book supplies when at least it comes to at least protecting the that part of your collection. So now we'll go into the third topic, which is going to be how to buy comics. So typically you go to your local comic book shop. A lot of people refer to them as LCSs, just abbreviated local comic book shop. But so if you're going to your local comic book shop, you can, have, if there's a certain title that you're really, really collecting, you can definitely have them start a pull list for you. And that way you can actually get those new books on time, and that way you don't have to sit there and kind of fight the lines, especially if there's a really, really hot book out there. And that way, ultimately you're getting the books that you want. The other thing is, obviously there's a lot of people that are selling books on eBay, and there's also Instagram and Facebook. Those have been really big channels that a lot of people have been letting go of books. Just be careful. There are a lot of people that are definitely moving a lot of books, and sometimes the prices are a little bit higher than they really should be. So that's kind of my little tip to how you should buy. Now, if you go to your local comic book shop and you see a book and you absolutely love it, and it's the right book for you, and it's the right type of grade, and you absolutely love it, then definitely look at picking something like that up, because it's 9 times out of 10, if you find a book and you really, really like it, the chances of trying to find that book again in the exact same grade are almost near impossible. Take it from a veteran of collecting for a really long time. I can't count how many books I've went and skipped on, and next time when I was actually looking for that book, I could not find it. it is better to have extras of a book than not to have the book at all. Anything you want to touch on that, Norm?
Just that, depending on what type of collector, investor, speculator you are, if you're a speculator and you're looking for books, you can certainly hit up the recent books. It's going to be hit or miss, and you're going to have to flip it quick.
Yeah.
But you can definitely make money at it, which is something that I've done, something that I know you've done, Steve, and a lot of the folks we know in the business do that occasionally. I think the bread and butter for a lot of speculators and investors is really more the Bronze and Silver Age.
Yep.
But it can still be done in the recent comics. So I would say for speculators, look at recent books, something you think might be made into a movie, or I think one of your picks was Berserker 1, which was a great pick with Keanu Reeves. Great book from Boom Studios. That's just one example, and it's already worth more than I paid for it.
Oh, yeah.
When it comes to investors, you want to be looking at older product. You want to find an LCS that actually sells at a little bit of a discount to market, or if not a discount, at least has some back issue bins you can look in and try to find some treasure. And then finally, for the collectors out there, if you're new into collecting and you want a profitable collection where you're buying something and then watching it go up in value, I would suggest DC Comics is a good place to start. The older stuff from the 70s is still accessible, and it won't take too many years before it's out of control and through the roof as well. So that would be my 3 picks for the 3 different kinds of comic book aficionados that we talk about on a weekly basis.
Cool. All right, so we're going to go on to topic number 4. And that's going to be what to look for. Now, I want to put out a huge warning out there for everybody is this week there was a little book that I think we've talked about on this channel, and that was Ultimate Fallout 4. This book right here is not graded. In fact, this one is actually raw, but the difference is this is a facsimile. This is the real book. They look very, very similar together.
See if you can hold those up a little bit closer to the camera so people can see how close. I mean, you can't tell almost.
Yeah, they are very, very close. But I have found where Marvel made the little changes to, and these are what you have to look for if you're in the market for an Ultimate Fallout 4 first printing. Okay, so the Ultimate Fallout 4 first printing has a nice squared out barcode right here. All right, and then on top of that you have the Marvel logo right over here. Marvel logo right over here will be blacked out, or it will have no background. It won't look like the typical red squared Marvel. And then this barcode will not touch this spine at all. It won't. Now on the facsimile, you have nice little red logo around it, and then this barcode has that little white border that actually touches the spine. So that is how you can tell them apart. Be very careful right now, because I have already seen where people are trying to sell this book right here as if it was this book right here. And so if you're on eBay and you're trying to find yourself a Ultimate Fallout 4, be extremely careful. That is the biggest thing. The second thing, or we'll just get back into the actual overall episode, is what you're looking for when you're actually buying a comic. Now, from a presser standpoint and everything like that, I'm going to say the biggest thing that you should be looking out for is you should look at how square the book is, if the book has any spine ticks on it or color breaks in the cover, and that also includes the rear cover. That is the one thing that everybody always forgets. They always forget to look at the rear covers. I cannot count how many of my clients have came to me and said, "Hey, look, I really want to get this book nice and cleaned up and make it look really nice for me to send this into CGC." But at the end of the day, the back cover looks like it was just trampled over and it will not get that super high grade. So, because when a lot of people are selling books online, they're only showing off the front cover. Occasionally, you'll see people show off the back cover. So, there's that. The other thing you should also look at is your staple quality. Now, what I mean by staple quality is the way that the staple actually claps around the paper on the center of the book. That clamping of that paper is extremely vital, especially when you're buying older books like Silver Age, Golden Age, even a lot of your Copper Age books. Because the books are really old. A lot of them have been loved very heavily, and those center pages are very, very fragile. And so a lot of times, when you buy Silver Age, especially, you'll see that the bottom staple or the top staple has already been popped. So what pop means is that it's actually been torn away from the actual book as a whole. So that is a huge, huge thing. And if you go into your local comic book shop and you're going to be buying a $400, $500 book, make sure that you look at the interior of your book. Actually see what it is that you're actually buying. And if you can do that, most of the time, I have never really met any comic book shop that hasn't been like, "Hey, look, I don't want you to see what the inside of this book looks like." They're really, really transparent, and so because they want to sell the books, so it's okay to let those books or go and actually see the insides of those books. You have to request it, but it's at least if you're spending that type of money on a big book, that's something you should do. Anything that you would kind of add to that, Norm?
As far as just look what you look for on the books, I
Yeah.
would say a good rule of thumb is to take and just run your finger down the spine of the book.
Yep.
You need to look at it, and you'll be able to feel the bumps if there are any spine ticks, and that's a good trick that I use because I go through books pretty quick, and if I'm just looking for, say, something out of the 50-cent bin, but I need it to be in pristine condition, I might do that little check really quickly.
Yeah.
Especially when you go into a lot of comic shops, you'll see the lighting is not the greatest.
That
You're
is
not
true.
going to have bright light. You're going to have diffused lighting. They don't not that it's purposely done, but not only do they have to save on electricity, but they don't want a super bright environment for the books.
Yeah.
It's not good for them, first off, and secondly, you need to be aware that you need to either bring some kind of light or be able to feel and actively look for, hold it up to the light and look for damage to the book. But I would say, yeah, that feel along the spine, just a real light caress along the spine.
Yeah, yeah. And what you're basically talking about is where you actually just go like this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what you're really doing is that's actually how CGC actually grades a lot of books. So you actually, when they actually grab the book, they'll actually grab it, they'll feel down the spine, and
Sure.
they'll see if it has any of those waves or those ticks. Because when a book actually ticks, it'll actually kind of make like a bump, and so
Yeah.
it's almost like reading Braille sometimes.
It really is, and in some ways, it's better than using your eyesight
Yeah.
because you might get a different shine on that book and miss one of those bumps. But when you put your finger on it
Yep.
and just lightly, now I'm not talking about just lightly touching it and caressing the spine of the book will give you a good idea. That's probably a good rule of thumb, a good check that I do that everybody could use and would be helpful to especially newbies.
Yeah, no, 100%. That is the biggest thing, especially if it's a book that you want to go send off to get graded. So I think that's everything on the what we need to look for when it comes to comics.
Mm.
And of course, then you got like your keys that if there's a certain series that you're looking for, make sure you do your research on what it is that you want to actually collect, and that way you can kind of see what it is. All right. So the next topic is going to be comic market by age.
Okay, so what we've got here is
That's
the platinum market. Platinum golden is an older market. It's very expensive, and as a percentage of the total comics sold, it is 23% of the overall comic market. The silver age is the next age up, mostly in the 60s, well, some 50s, mostly 60s. It's 27% of the market. The bronze age is 15.4%, and the modern era, which is not shocking, is the largest percent of the market. Now, if we give that some kind of number designation, and I pulled these books, this data off of GPA. In those of you that don't know it, GPA has been around for years. Professional comic dealers have used them. It's basically a way to track prices, current prices, everything updated constantly. They pull off eBay and all these different sites and compile the data so that retailers can make intelligent decision on pricing.
Yep.
Just give you some idea. The overall market is $216 million. That's from last August until this July. That's how much money was spent on comics, according to just this one website. Now they are large and they capture most of the market, but there could very easily be another 50 million in books sold at conventions or out of private, LCS shops, whatnot. And there probably is. So you're looking at a market of roughly 300 million a year for comics.
Yeah. Well, and so it sounds like a really big number, but realistically, those numbers aren't really too obscure. Just because those books are a lot of times extremely expensive. So, because you're talking about some books that are like, a couple $20,000.
Yeah,
Um,
I touch on that. Did you want me to go into that? Because
no,
that's
we'll get onto that later on in the episode.
okay.
But yeah, so that was just for the platinum, or is that platinum and gold?
No, I did each of the individual markets. So it's like, so if I were to do each of them, $50 million in platinum gold, 58 million in silver, 33 million in bronze, and 73 million in modern age comics. And the total is $216 million sold per GPA analysis, which is the most comprehensive of the bunch, but does not include everything. So there's even more. There's even a larger market out there. I would put it at easily 300 million, maybe more.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's interesting to see these kinds of numbers and to know that what you're buying and selling out of is not just happenstance. That there's hundreds of thousands of dollars trading hands every day for this stuff.
Yep. So is that all that you had on what was the comics by the market?
By the age,
Yeah.
yeah, I do have a little bit more on percent of value if we get to that the top 20.
All right, so let's get into that top 20. Top genre percents.
Yeah, thank you. It's same company, GPA analysis or GPA for comics, PTY Limited 2020, and the breakdown was very interesting in that what they did is they took the top 20 books in each of those ages and then told us of all the books sold for that particular age, these top 20 represented percentage of value, and I'll go through each of them slowly. So for instance, the golden age and that mixes in the platinum,
Okay.
is 68%. So 20 titles sold continuously throughout the year represented 68% of the value of the golden age that is sold throughout the year. The silver was even higher. 20 books represented 87% of the silver age value. So you can kind of see how the big keys are really where the huge money is at. And it's what a lot of the large dealers, big investors, uh, high flying speculators, and serious collectors trading in and out of are the silver age and the golden age. At 87% of the value is in the top 20 books. Bronze is 77%. And interestingly enough, the modern era is a little thinned out, and that it only hits a 39% of the value is in the top 20 books. So whether that's because what specialized books are being sold with certain kinds of covers, or rare retailer limited series editions, whatever the case may be, the primary value of the moderns is much more it's just dispersed across the entire market, whereas bronze, silver, gold, very focused, and roughly three-quarters of the value in each of those I just mentioned is the top 20 books in those ages. And which leads me to the inevitable conclusion that if you're buying and selling in the bronze, silver, and gold age, you should be looking to try to add those top 20 keys or portions of them, or even low grade aspects of those keys, because that's where a lot of the value and money is. And there's nothing wrong with buying non-keys, believe me, and that's a whole probably separate article for a different time that Steve and I have talked about many times. And if you're buying non-keys, hey, more power to you. There's just as much rarity in the rarest 9.9, uh, say a Marvel Tales #1, or
Yeah.
Marvel Tales #50, whatever it might be, whatever comic it might be, but you happen to own the only 9.9 slabbed by CGC of that book. That's money right there, even though it's not a key. So that would not fit into the top 20, but it still has a lot of value. So there's value across the market, but this kind of tells you where the focus is. And and to be aware that there is a top heaviness of the highest 20 books in each of the ages. Even the modern age, 40% of the value is the top 20 books. So your thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great kind of breakdown. Um, it just kind of shows that the new modern books, there's a lot more of them out there. So when you actually see a lot of the retailer exclusives, or like the Midtown comics, exclusive covers, um, those are a lot of really really good looking books. Usually they have like a special guest artist on them, uh, but for the most part they're still able to print them, and so that being said, they can still pump out first printings of those books, or they could do a second printing, or a third printing, or a fourth, or a 20th printing. I mean, I've seen
Let me
some.
ask you this, Steve. I
Yeah.
think what you're getting at is the marketing on it. And would you say that those types of books from the modern age are heavily marketed and rely more on the marketing than they do the rarity of the individual book? What's
Yes.
your thoughts
Yes.
there?
Yes. 100%. The actual rarity of the books on current stuff isn't really gonna be that rare. I mean, it's not that rare right now. So if you're buying into the new current books, get stories that you like, get everything that you want to that you want to collect. But for the most part, what you're looking at is actually, if that is what you want to invest in, is current books that are out on the market right now. That's fine. You can do that. just know that you're playing the long game in the long haul, because after, say 10, 20 years, um, just like we'll go back to 1992 when X-Men #1 came out, the Jim Lee beautiful book. That book was so heavily printed. In fact, it holds the record for the most printed
Most
book.
print. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking about the most printed book out on the market. Every comic book shop owned at least 20 to 40 copies of that book. And they were just all over the place. And but now, we're going into almost 30 years old of that book, and it's actually worth money now. But when it first came out, it wasn't worth the paper that it was printed on. And that's just because there's a nostalgia factor to it, but then there's also, you know, people want to have those 9/8. And the thing was, is since so many people were such novice collectors, there wasn't a lot of really good taken care of copies of that book. So
Yes.
finding 9.8s in that book is extremely hard. CGC and CBCS are grading those things so strict right now. Um,
Yeah. And then it has the Jim Lee factor too, which
oh yeah,
definitely
100%.
factors in. Yeah.
Um, but so, but now you go look at like your Silver Age books; those are even older, obviously, because they were a lot of times they were from the '60s and maybe
Sure.
even a little bit sooner than that.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at the keys in those genres, they're they weren't taking care of their books at all because they were buying them for 10 cents a piece or 15 cents a piece. And so overall, those books are not going to be in 9.8 grades. And that's why if you look at the market and you see, Amazing Spider-Man, we'll say 31, that's a 9.8, you're going to see huge numbers. And it's just because that book wasn't really kept that great care of. And
Sure.
it was because at that time, there was no such thing as speculating on comics. There was no such thing as how to protect your books and everything like that. So so if you do find a really high grade of that book, or just say any Silver Age book, those are the types of books that I'm always saying, look, you might spend a little bit higher of a premium for that book to be looking that nice, but you'll probably be one of the only people that actually own something that is that clean, that nice looking, and all around, it'll definitely make you a lot more money the further along that it goes. Um, just
Yeah.
because
The
they're,
the
yeah, go ahead.
the book, the quality of the books change as the times change. So as you go down, spiral down through time, Bronze Age becomes difficult to find, but not any even close to what it is to find a Silver Age book, and the same thing with the Golden Age. And each of those eras, it's very hard to find high grades in those eras because it wasn't until late 70s, early 80s that we even started having professional comic book shops. At least they weren't pushed as much as they had been after that time. And you didn't have professional collectors or not as many as you do now. And yeah, I completely agree with
Yeah, and it wasn't until
Jake.
the it was about mid 70s, that's when you actually started seeing your
Yep.
first bags being actually
Sure.
produced. And there's still a lot of those original bags that are still on those comics. um,
I just bought a collection just replete with those, and you and
yeah.
I saw some of the damage that was done from old bags and old boards, which gets back to something we were talking about earlier in our episode.
Yep. And that's the biggest key is make sure that you're constantly just replacing that stuff. And if you are buying um, those types of high grade books or the Silver Age or Bronze Age or Copper Age books, just know that sometimes when you're buying those books, when they are that rare, um, they're going to be a little bit more difficult to find. But if, say, like your local comic book shop actually does have them, sometimes they will actually ask just a little bit more than what the actual market value is. And it's not because they're trying to rip you off, or, that they're trying to get one over on you. It's really because they have a really, really rare piece that does not just walk into their shop on every day. And so, if you want to own that piece of history, you know, you do have to pay a little bit for that. But just know that, they've probably already paid just about the exact same amount for that book. So that's kind of a little insider thing. There's a lot of people that always go, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that this shop is charging me this much for this book," and whereas a couple years ago I could have bought this book for pennies on the dollar. Well, the market changes all the time, and that's where these percentages actually come in to play. And for the most part, that's why when you actually look at a lot of those rare books and you see how nice they look, that's when they'll actually get more money for them and stuff like that. So yeah. So then we'll just go ahead and wrap up this week's episode. We pretty much talked about your what you need to look out for, how to buy certain books. Make sure that everything is all nice and pretty when you put them into your nice boxes and everything like that. We went over the percentages. We went over the different types of ages of books, and just basically where the market actually lies, where people are actually buying and selling out of. I think it was a overall great episode. Um, there was a lot of information, especially when when Norm was breaking down, you know, where most of the market is actually buying and selling out of. It was actually a big surprise to me that most of it was in the Silver Age, but it makes sense because that's where a lot of those really good keys are. Um,
Especially the Marvel stuff.
oh yeah, well um, so anything you want to add to the closing there, Norm?
No, I think we're good to wrap up. I just want to just touching on everything kind of briefly. Just be aware that there's different ages that you're buying, so you're not going to get the same quality in each of the ages. It's gonna differ, but the rarity is going to go up the older the book gets. Typically, there are some books that are new that are rare too, but those are few and far between. Most of the time, you're going to pay for rarity. Whenever you're buying a big key, like say Amazing Spider-Man 129, you're going to have to pay a premium for it. There's just no way around it. And believe me, I have tried. So
That it's a good thing that you brought that up because
yeah,
that is the speaking from working at two different shops, that is the number one fastest selling book. I want to put that out there right now. If you
yeah.
see the book and you want that book, buy it. It does not matter what the price is because the chances of you getting that book again are going to be so far and in between that you will probably never be able to get your hands on it because those books are just so rare.
I have owned 3 Amazing Spider-Man 129s. Currently, I own one copy. How many of you own, Steve?
I have owned four at one time,
Yeah, yeah.
but I just kind of kept gradually going and actually upgrading mine. So now I have a very very nice copy.
Nice.
It's probably in the 9.6, 9.8 realm. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so
Those
yeah,
those are hard books to get, and when if you're really on the lookout, like I really wanted to own the first Punisher, as I'm sure Steve did too,
yeah,
and it's a huge book and a huge character, and that character will be around as long as Marvel's around, and so wanted to own it, and I was willing to pay a premium. At the time I bought it, I paid like $100 premium for it, and now looking back, that seems like nothing. So
yeah. I mean, so the great thing, and this week, we can kind of get off on a little bit on this kind of a tangent, But
Sure.
the Amazing Spider-Man 129, it is first appearance Punisher, but it's also first appearance of Jackal as well. And not saying that they're going to be making a movie with Jackal in it or anything. He's kind of one of those second-rate B-list characters, but
Hmm.
he is definitely one of those characters that everybody does like. But it's also kind of like Iron Man 55, first appearance of Thanos,
Yeah.
but it's also the first appearance of Drax, the Destroyer.
Sure.
So most people know Iron Man 55 as first appearance of Thanos.
Hmm.
But so when you do see some of those books that are really high priced, you're not just getting not it's not necessarily all the time, but it's a good amount of the time. It's more than one first appearance because there's actually multiple characters
Yeah,
being added.
there's certainly multiple key books that you can buy that have not just one character. Absolutely,
Yeah.
and you pay more for those too.
Yep.
No,
All,
that's really all I have. I think we touched on a lot of key points there.
all right. So once again, my name's Steve. This is over here is my buddy Norm, and we're gonna be signing off. Once again, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe.